left the aerial frame, which also interests us, but relatively. Let's move on to the terrestrial frame, with metric chambers. Here we see an example of Wild's metric chamber. It was a metric chamber where, on the frame, the main point was reported, through 4 reference marks, and the main distance. This camera was with interchangeable optics. But by way of saying interchangeable optics, basically the whole machine body was replaced. Only the tripod and the support remained, which served to orient the room. This chamber could undergo various inclinations, snap, which guaranteed from the error of angle measurement. Had a 200mm lens on the 9x12 format, the 100mm, and then a beautiful lens, the 45mm, always on the 9x12 format. What we see in photography is a strong wide angle. So much so that, if you notice, on the lens there is a filter that is not uniform, but darker in the center, and faded towards the edge, because, with a strong wide angle, the rays orthogonal to the film, we incised a lot more than those who had a strong inclination. I repeat, it was a magnificent goal. Especially in the historical centers, it allowed quite satisfactory shots. Here we see a shot of the facade of the Bari Cathedral. In this case, considering the surface of the facade flat, assuming that the facade was vertical, and putting the vertical frame with the camera, a scale print, even 150, could easily be made. Then, I repeat, they are particular objectives. If anyone has tried to enlarge, with the machine of the format 24x36, when it comes to 18x24 cm is already at the limit. With the metric chambers it is possible to enlarge, very, very strongly, keeping all the details. Just think that this room cost 50 million lire. In comparison, the objectives of ordinary cameras reach, at the maximum, 1 million lire. With these metric cameras, equipped with trestles, the shooting was done from a certain point of view, placing the 2 stands at the distance corresponding to the base. To ensure the perpendicularity of the optical axis to the base, the support was equipped with a target, and provided the inclination of the optical axis with respect to the base. Shooting was taken from a tripod and then the camera was moved to the other. This operation, however, involved some time, with some disadvantages, like the different exposure of the frames, but had the ability to adapt based on the shooting distance, which, remember, in stereo photography, is between 1/5 and 1/20 of the shooting distance. In addition to the single chamber, which had its advantages but also disadvantages, we have the stereometric chamber, which we have already seen being used by the photogrammetric unit of traffic police, in the areas affected by the 1980 earthquake. These are 2 metric chambers, blocked at the end of a bar, which on average measures 1 meter and 20, but also 40 centimeters, which was used by the Swiss police to detect the crime scene. With this room you go easy, the 2 rooms being blocked. Therefore, the reference system is well determined. We can also make tilted or upward shots. Setting up, that is arranging the chamber with a vertical axis or known inclination, is rapid. We also say that we are relatively interested, because, for us, The interest in the relief is the photographed object. For the reference system, we can use the object itself. We will see further on the shots taken from a floating platform in Venice. The photograph was taken when the bubble indicated the vertical position of the y-axis. But even if they were shooting with an inclined axis, it did not involve errors. The building was fixed, beautifully blocked, and it could be measured and observed in all its details. This stereometric chamber was actually created for the detection of road accidents and used by the Swiss police. Then, in the 1980s, the urban police of Bari also equipped themselves with a photogrammetric unit, and thanks to this camera, it was possible to carry out surveys of monuments damaged by the 1980 earthquake. This room, in particular, has a decentralization of the slab. So, downwards it had a higher vertical shooting angle. More precisely, 32 degrees downwards, to be able to take up more ground surface, and 17 degrees upwards. In architecture it was used upside down, so as to have a greater angle upwards, and a lower angle downwards, beyond the inclination, which could be 10 degrees, 30 degrees, 60 degrees and 90 degrees. Then supports were made on which two single cameras are adapted for close-ups. Used here in experimentation for teaching photogrammetry in elementary school. All this obviously presupposes a clarity of ideas on what we have to photograph. And returns, evenly, all the talk made about photography. Aside from the case of aerial shots, where everything could be questionable. Because, on the plane or on the helicopter, you could tilt the car, for inclined shots of monuments. In the case of terrestrial photogrammetry, before starting the survey, it is necessary to have clear ideas on what to photograph and what details to detect. We never forget that relief is always a relief. I mean that if a mechanic does not know the engine, it is better that he does not open the hood, in order not to cause trouble. For example, before taking over a church, you need to know how the church works. For each object it is necessary to know what it is used for and how it works.